Amazing. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us this evening at the FGLI webinar for June, titled Beyond Howard and Spelman, HBCUs with an Eye on Affordability. My name is Diana Alvarado. I work with College Essay Guide part-time, and I work for a college and career success nonprofit based out of Boston full-time. And I am heading up the FGLI webinar series aimed at providing professional development to first-gen low-income students and counselors who support them. Really excited to have you all here for, I think, our fourth webinar in this series, and excited to continue planning more for the rest of the year. And so on that note, our moderator, Mark, is going to send a link to a Google form in the chat, which we would love for you all to fill out at some point tonight, telling us a little bit about who you are and what type of content you want to see moving forward in this FGLI series. We have some awesome things planned, but a lot of room in the calendar for 2024 to continue planning presentations. And so we want to know what you all want to learn more about. So please do feel free to fill out that Google form whenever you can. Mark is also going to send the link to our live events and webinars page, which is where you can find all of these webinars for our series and more at College Essay Guy. So please keep an eye out on that. July's webinar will be finalized very soon. It will be focused on fly-in programs and summer programs for first-gen low-income students. We're really excited for that webinar topic, and would really love to see a lot of you there as well. So check that out to keep up to date on this series. So again, my name is Diana Alvarado, and I am joined by our presenter tonight, Portia Franklin Gordon, who is the Senior Director of College and Career Pathways at West End House here in Boston. I've had the privilege of getting to know Portia through the Success Boston community aimed at increasing the college enrollment and persistent rate in the city of Boston. And so I'm really excited to have her here tonight, and she has a lot to share on HBCUs and affordability of those schools. And so I'm excited to turn the mic over to Portia for her to introduce herself further and get started with the webinar. Thanks for being here, everyone.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much, Diana and team. Thank you for that warm introduction. I'll try to live up to all of those kind words. As Diana mentioned, I am the Senior Director of the College and Career Pathways programming over at the West End House Boys and Girls Club. In many ways, we are a traditional boys and girls club. We have aquatics and we have sports, arts program, but we're unique in the fact that we provide college access and college success to our young people who are post-secondary. And we'll also have a budding career training program. And so we're doing a lot of different things in the post-secondary college and career space to support our students, no matter what their path may be. And recently, I'll talk about this a little bit later, but we started our first Pathways to HBCU program. So 2023-2024 school year, we had a 12-week HBCU exploration program that culminated in an HBCU trip during April vacation this year, and our students went to Atlanta and we toured different HBCUs. We ate a lot of great food and we got a Southern cultural experience as well. But it allowed our students who had never been to any HBCUs or visited to really get that experience, and now it's becoming part of their college list. So really excited about that. But I'm going to go through my presentation. If you have questions, throw them in the chat. And I know that we'll have time at the end for Q&A as well. So I'm just going to move forward. I'm going to do a little bit of a pop quiz. So you can throw stuff in the chat. You can, think about it in your mind. But I think we all know who this person may be. But what college did she attend? I'll give a little hints. Generated somewhere in the South. So I just kind of hold that for a second. Obviously, this is Oprah Winfrey, talented actress and producer and just all-around businesswoman, former television show host, and she attended Tennessee State University, which is an HBCU in Nashville, Tennessee. So wanted to kind of give a highlight to a Black woman who's excelling in her field and also attended an HBCU, and love Howard and Spelman, but she did not attend one of those, and obviously has made her mark in the world. So I wanted to just give that highlight. So we're going to go through the agenda, and the agenda looks small, but it has a lot of meat to it when we get there. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why I chose an HBCU and what my experience was like. And then I'm going to jump right into HBCU history, hopefully pulling out some nuggets that some you may have known, some you may not have known. And then I'm going to talk about the role of HBCUs today. I know our young people are getting saturated with different types of colleges, and there's a lot more equity and access today than there ever was before, but there's still a lot of missing pieces. So what is the role of HBCUs today when we think about higher education? Then I'm going to go a lot into some myths, kind of debunking some things and challenging some theories around credibility and affordability. And then I'm going to talk about some different pathways. So if you're supporting students who are interested in HBCUs, first of all, we're going to talk about the roles of HBCUs today, and then we're going to go into the myths, and then you have all the information. So if young people are ready and are interested, you have an avenue to present to them if they really want to attend those institutions. All right, so let's jump in it. I usually start with my personal story. I'm originally from Mississippi, but I went to college at Bethune-Cookman University. So for those who don't know, Bethune-Cookman University was founded by Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune, who was originally from South Carolina, but founded this school, like many people in her day, as a training school for teachers. And at that time, it was a training school for young women who wanted to be teachers. But down the line, she merged with this all-boys school, the Cookman Institute. So it became Bethune-Cookman Institute. And later it was a college that was granting bachelor's degrees. And in 2007, they started to grant master's degrees. So it became a university. So I went there in 2008, very eager 18-year-old. I received a full tuition and fee scholarship, and I also had the opportunity to have my room and board paid and a stipend for books. So I received kind of that once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I had always heard about that strong legacy. And it was daunting to move to Florida from Mississippi, but I'm thankful that I did it. So I got involved on campus. It was almost a culture of involvement. So if you weren't involved, I was like, hey, what are you doing? You need to get involved on campus. So it really created a family kind of community. I joined a sorority. Volunteering was a very big part of the culture at Bethune-Cookman. So you see me here volunteering with some of my friends. And I really had a lifelong opportunity, and just really something that kind of stuck with me even till today. So I think it was an incredible opportunity for me. It was a great financial choice because I was able to receive that scholarship, and it set me up for I think the next phases of my professional career as well. All right, so we're going to get into some HBCU history. So there are currently 107 HBCUs that are across the United States and the Virgin Islands and also territories. So UVI, University of the Virgin Islands, is an HBCU, and also University of DC. So I would say US and territories as well. And when you hear the term HBCU, so we're really talking about schools that were started prior to 1964. After that, there's a different designation that I'll talk about. But most of the schools originated between 1865 and 1900, and a large number just in 1867 alone, which was just 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. So if you can see in the early history of HBCUs, there was a great need for educating young Black people and Black people in general, and those avenues were not afforded in other spaces. So we had to create our own. So many HBCUs were founded by people who did identify as Black, and I'm also thankful that many HBCUs were also founded by people who did not identify as Black, who were unified in the idea that Black people should and were able to and capable of being educated. So one of the terms that I also mentioned was PBI. So some schools that have predominantly Black student population are considered a predominantly Black institution if they were started after 1964. So you may see that term kind of float around as well. So in Boston, we have a college called Roxbury Community College, because HBCUs, they also range from community colleges to state institutions, land grant institutions, public, private. That same designation follows with predominantly Black institutions that were started after 1964. So we have Roxbury Community College in Boston, and actually Chicago State University is considered a predominantly Black institution. So they're similar in nature. It's just the historical kind of designation is different, but there are many different institutions that predominantly serve Black Americans. And then there are also this is not in my presentation, but it's called Hispanic Serving Institutions. So there are a large number of institutions that are predominantly what we call Hispanic. And all of them are very unique in serving a specific type of population. Many are first generation college students. And so those institutions are skilled in how to support students who are coming from a particular background. So even when we think about all the many choices that all of our young people from all different identities can apply to, have the ability to go and excel, there are a lot of institutions that have just such an expertise in how to support students from a particular background, including HBCUs. So as we move forward, I want to talk about really what I see as the role of HBCUs today. And I kind of will mention variations of these throughout my presentation. But one of the biggest things that I see is culture and acceptance. So there's a sense of walking onto a campus and feeling like you belong that actually is a strong retention strategy, because our young people can be educated at many different colleges, but what is the place that you're going to feel like you belong there and you are accepted there? One of the things that Bethune-Cookman related to my experience is that it wasn't just the professors, it was I made friends with the assistant to the dean. So everyone felt like they had a hand in my education. Everyone felt like they had a hand in making sure that I graduated and that I was able to compete when I finished. So there's a culture around how do we rock around and support students that I really feel that is unique to HBCUs. And it's not just the professor's job. It's not just the RA's job. It's everyone's job. And it's nice to go on campus and not have to explain yourself all the time. You know, your hair and the way you dress and, you know, just all the different parts of you that you want to shine through and be unique and authentic. There's just such a uniqueness that happens when you're at a historically Black college that, you know, it's hard to get somewhere else. So I wanted to make sure I highlighted that. And then also the unique educational experiences. I think about Morehouse that has a minor in Japanese studies. And I think about Tuskegee that excels in all of these aerospace technology and programs to support pilots, which is I think they're the only a historically Black college that has a program like that. And I think they even have a veterinarian medicine program. So all these unique experiences that you might have at some predominantly white institutions, but they're not married with that cultural experience. So it's almost like I can get into this very competitive academic program that's going to prepare me for the next stages of my career. And I get the cultural piece as well. And I get to feel comfortable walking into a classroom. And I get to be mentored by someone who understands my struggle as a student. So you kind of get the 2-in-1. And then the 3-in-1, in many cases, is the reduced cost. So I'm on the East Coast. So when I think about college costs and think about that for my students, many of the costs here, even for a state institution, are comparable to the HBCUs, which are predominantly in the South, and I'll show you the map later. When you think about those costs, they're kind of comparable, if not less. And the cost of living. And if I want to stay here after graduation, can I afford to do that? So all those different layers are things that I tell students to think about when they're thinking about what school they want to go to, and making sure they add HBCUs to their list, and ones that hit all three. Ones where I can feel comfortable on campus, that's pretty much all of them. Ones with very unique or targeted educational experiences or very unique programs, and ones that are lower in cost, and thinking about the added cost of, do I live in a very high cost area? Am I going to pay a lot if I want to live off campus? Am I going to pay a lot if I'm just going to the grocery store? So really thinking deeply about all the things that go into that experience. So I just want to show you a map. I know the map is like half of the US because that's where historically Black colleges are located. Alabama has the highest number of HBCUs at 14. And I'm sorry I can't kind of zoom in, but it's great because there's so many different types of HBCUs all over the US. So I talked about HBCUs being community colleges, but then some of them are state institutions. Some of them are private institutions. There's a religious institution in Georgia. I think it's called ITC, that is an HBCU, but then there's also a religious school. There's Morehouse School of Medicine that's also considered a historically Black college, but they have a specific focus. So there's all different types of HBCUs. I know that Paul Quinn and also Prairie View are on the cutting edge of kind of this married workforce development in college. So it's really an extension of what an internship is. It's almost like a co-op that we have here on a lot of schools on the East Coast, but these are just unique experiences. I know we're saying outside of Spelman, but Spelman is all women's if you want that experience. Morehouse is all men if you want that experience. So there's a lot of different types of historically Black colleges. And I also want to name, some of them are in kind of rural areas outside of the city, because many times the reality is those are just the places that Black people could actually own land and start their schools. But some of them are in, bigger cities like Atlanta. I talked about us taking some students on an HBCU tour. So you have quite a few located there. Bethune-Cookman was in Daytona Beach, Florida, which is not far from Orlando. So if you're a young person from a city like Boston and you like the kind of city vibe and you don't want to go to a very small college in the middle of nowhere, there's options for you. If you're looking for smaller colleges, there's options for you. If you want a big college like Florida A&M, there's an option for you. They have thousands of students. So there's many different options and different types of HBCUs, and there's pretty southern region is most of them. A few on the Northeast, DC, Pennsylvania, but most of them are concentrated in the Northeast. So just something to think about if you're a practitioner and you're recommending schools. All right, so let's get into some myths. So we're going to talk a little bit about credibility and affordability. And I just wanted to kind of outline what I mean when I say credibility and what I mean when I say affordability. So I'll just read this. Credibility is the quality of services received and the ability of the schools to prepare graduates for postgraduate success. So if a school, I believe, is really credible, then they're going to have the best services while you're on campus, and they're going to have everything that you need to give you the tools so that when you graduate, you're set up for success. And then affordability, the ability of schools to provide adequate financial aid for students to cover a majority of the cost of their schooling and finish college with less than $25,000 in debt upon graduation. So that's my definition. So if you're looking at, more than 25,000, then chances are you're looking at private loans. You're looking at a lot of money, out of pocket. And so when I counsel and support students, HBCU or not, I'm trying to find that sweet spot. So when they do graduate, they're not burdened with debt, so that they get the majority of their money in grants, scholarships, the reasonable amount of loans. But that's what I'm looking at when I'm evaluating any college, particularly when I'm talking about the historically Black colleges. So let's dig a little bit deeper. So let's first talk about the credibility piece, because there's a lot I have to say around this. There's a lot around this. And so there's 5 different myths that I kind of pulled out from doing a little bit of research, thinking about when I was in school, and people were like, oh, you're going to HBCU, that's great, but, are you going to get a job after? And are you going to, is it a good school? And generally, a lot of times credibility is how people identify, is it a good school? So the first myth is HBCUs offer substandard education. And I think sometimes, we have to understand that bias that's kind of coming through. Is it substandard specifically because it's a historically Black institution? I'll get into funding later, but a lot of funding issues with the school, and there's a reason why. So is it going to offer you a substandard education? Is it going to offer you less than what you feel like you deserve? So I did a little bit of research, and I found a Gallup poll, actually. And so they did a little bit of surveying to graduates after they had finished. And then one of the things that they found was that HBCUs offer Black graduates a better college experience than Black graduates at predominantly white institutions. So now you're talking about the experience piece. And a lot of that is because you have a different experience as the only Black person in the classroom. As you matriculate through your major and you're a young person in STEM, how do you navigate being one of the few Black or brown people in a major that's predominantly white? So all those different experiences came through, but the poll found that Black students at Black colleges had a better experience than Black students at a PWI. And then the second thing, I was looking at a different post. I'm like, okay, I found that one poll, that one piece of information. Let me kind of dig a little deeper. And so I was looking at some information from the National Science Foundation, and found that 21 of the top 50 institutions that produce Black graduates who go on to earn a doctorate in science and engineering are HBCUs. So 21 of the top 50 institutions that produce Black graduates who go on to earn a doctorate in science or engineering are HBCUs. So there's definitely, when we think about the the postgraduate success, the ability to get jobs, what is that alumni network like, all those different things, HBCUs are definitely very, very credible and provide a strong education, whereas, different companies and different organizations feel that those graduates are ready to work there. So let's go to the second one. HBCUs only educate and enroll Black students. So 2 different things that I found. Well, one was from my own experience, and one I was like, let me do some digging and see what other organizations are saying. So from my experience, HBCUs educate more than just Black students. Yes, the majority of when I went to Bethune-Cookman University, the majority of the people that I went to school with, my classmates, were Black, but there's just such a richness and plethora of what it means to be Black. And so you saw someone who's Afro-Latina, you saw someone, one of my friends, she was from Jamaica, and I'm like, that's interesting, and she had a very different experience than me growing up in the South in Mississippi. So you just had people that had very different cultural experiences, although we many of us did identify as Black. But then you had some people who did not identify as Black at all, who were coming there because they wanted a different experience, were coming there because they got a scholarship. They were just a regular college student that also received a scholarship, or also, thought that this school was a great school and wanted to go. So I think there's an array of different ways to be Black and you can get that experience. But HBCUs are not only educating just Black students, although we are educating, the majority of Black students. I did find something interesting, that one of the HBCUs in West Virginia, though, Bluefield State College, over 80% of their student population is white. And so I was reading and looking at different maps throughout the years, just the demographics of that area had changed a lot. And now over 80% of students at that HBCU, even though it's really small, but over 80% don't identify as white, but they wanted to keep that HBCU designation. And then also I found that at Xavier University in Louisiana, 1 in 5 students aren't Black. So you see that many different young people who are seeking higher education, and they have master's level and doctorate levels too. So, many different people of different ages are not just thinking, oh, this is the HBCU. No, they're thinking the quality of the education is here, so this is where I want to go, and it happens to be an HBCU. So I found that really, really interesting. And then the third myth, it says HBCUs don't prepare students for post-graduate life. So when I think about that, I'm thinking, are people able to get a job 6 months after they graduate? Are they able to get a job in their field? Do they feel like they have all the skills and all of the competencies they need to really step out into the world post college graduation? So again, looking at different reports and looking at different information from UNCF and different polls, HBCUs report higher quality and more meaningful relationships with professors and mentors. So they're actually getting that kind of career focused experience or that connection while they're in school, which actually plays a big role in the students' professional development, so they feel ready to step out when they do graduate. And I also think when we think about HBCUs and the connection to the alumni network, you're building social capital, you're building economic capital and mobility. And so you're developing a wider network of people that can support you when you graduate. So there's an array of different things that are going to prepare you for postgraduate life. And I think the connection with professors that I talked about, how you're connecting with your classmates, how you're connecting with alumni, how you're building your portfolio while you're in school, your comfortability in public speaking, which was a big part of some of my business classes. All of those competencies and skills are going to help you when you graduate from college. And I think that at a HBCU, people understand how much the stakes are much higher for these particular students. So it's also ingrained in you. I know it was ingrained in me from day one. And then another myth that I want to talk about is HBCUs don't have selective admissions. So sometimes the credibility piece is based on, US News and World Report, and we're thinking about the rankings. And I think some of that has some meaning. But I think there's just a wider conversation about what makes a school a good school and what makes a program a good program. So it's also important to think about HBCUs in their context. Many of them may have higher or higher selection admissions because there's a particular type of student that they are going to educate, and they're skilled at educating, especially when it comes to inclusivity and equity on campus. Many colleges and universities with high acceptance rates, including HBCUs, they offer very rigorous coursework and enforce high standards on campus, which I think is great. But I think you have to balance that with what type of students are you what type of students are you intaking, and what are the supports that they're going to get when they actually come. But nevertheless, there are some HBCUs that do have more selective admissions. For example, FAMU, they boast a 33% acceptance rate, and their neighbor at Florida State is 25%. So if you're thinking about, oh, I want my students to be at a rigorous school, and I want to make sure rankings are important to me, and I want to make sure it's a lower acceptance rate. There are some HBCUs that have much lower acceptance rates for very different reasons, which I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but for very different reasons. But I do understand that for some people, that is a part of being a more credible institution. I do also want to name that many people don't report as much on this, but there is academic program acceptance. So a lot of HBCUs have very specific programs, and they have much higher applications to those specific programs. So the program acceptance rate may be lower, even if the institution kind of acceptance rate is a little bit higher. So I talked about a very specific program at Tuskegee, and then even the program at Morehouse that has the Japanese studies. So they're sometimes much there may be a higher acceptance rate for the university, even though the acceptance rate to that academic program, because of the rigor, small faculty, it also could be much lower. And then I'm going to get into the last myth, which is HBCUs are not respected by other colleges. So it kind of relates to myth number 4. And yes, sometimes, it does take our elite colleges. I can definitely think about that on the Northeast. It does take our elite colleges and institutions a little bit of time to think about how important HBCUs are. And I know that sometimes we're looking at those colleges to kind of validate the work of HBCUs and validate the work of other programs that are out there. So I will talk about 2 particular schools that have partnerships and relationships between HBCUs and PWIs. So even though it's not always a good idea that our elite institutions are going to have that power, but it is kind of a reality around how they're able to validate the work of HBCUs. So Tougaloo and Brown. Tougaloo College is located in Mississippi, very small town, a little rural area, and Brown, that's located in Rhode Island. They've had this partnership maybe since like 1964, but the 1960s, where they'll do a faculty exchange and a student exchange each semester, and has grown over the years. So one of the kind of bigger programs around it that they have is around their pre-med and early identification program. And then they also have a program where they're really looking at historic research projects. So a lot of those students will go to Mississippi, research or do research around the Mississippi Delta, which was an area, that was, very important to the civil rights movement. And they'll do research in that area, and they'll kind of be there for however long, maybe a semester, and then take those teachings back, and they'll do a faculty exchange and a student exchange. And then Harvard has I think they just celebrated this summer their first class. They might still actually be on campus, first class of Du Bois Scholars. So there's several HBCUs that will send students to this particular STEM research focused program. It's residential, during the summer, rigorous. And And so they'll have, I think maybe 15 or 20 or so students participate in that program. And so if you can imagine, you have 15 to 20 students who have, never been to Harvard, are all from HBCUs, are kind of going through that experience together, but are getting an amazing experience. And really, Harvard is kind of validating their schools because they're asking for those students. They're rising sophomore, juniors, and maybe seniors. But just kind of that idea around some of our more elite colleges wanting students from HBCUs to connect to the programs that they already run, and students are able to be competitive in those programs, just as a Brown student is, just as a Harvard student is. All right, so we're going to do a few more myths, but this time we're going to think about the affordability side. So myth number one, HBCUs are expensive. Well, I would say they're not much more expensive than any of our other colleges. Definitely, in many cases, they're cheaper options, specifically because of where they're located, in comparison to other schools. So I think, when you're comparing apples to apples and you're looking at an HBCU in Georgia, and then you're looking at a state institution in Georgia, there may be similar costs. If not more, if the school is a private school. So give that some consideration. But I'm also thinking about the context of the Northeast or the context of the West Coast, which many of our colleges are very, very expensive. So when you're thinking about supporting students in terms of affordability, you might actually get a better value if they're willing to, move and relocate and have a different experience. You might get a better value because if you think about those colleges, many of them are located in the South, and the cost of living is lower. The colleges cost less. I found that Rusk College, which is also in Mississippi, go figure, Rusk College, which was actually the alma mater of Ida B. Wells, it's actually the second cheapest college in the nation, period, HBCU or not. And then I went online and I'm like, oh, I wonder how much it actually costs. And then I was looking at the out-of-state costs in particular, because I know when we're thinking about costs, it's not just, in-state, we're looking at probably the out-of-state costs. And even the out-of-state costs for tuition fees, room and board, it's about $10,000 each semester, so about $20,000 a year. So even just in terms of cost, before we get to federal grants and state grants and scholarships and school aid, you're already looking at a much lower cost compared to even a state school that might be in your state. When you think about tuition fees, room and board, and you add up all those costs. So that was definitely surprising to see. And then there's also, when we think about expense, there's many state schools that get state funding. So it looks a little bit different than the aid that you may get at a private colleges, because you're really dependent on that alumni base or that fundraising base. So FAMU, huge college, Alabama A&M, both of them are land grant institutions. So now you're thinking about, depending on your major, you're probably going to get even more increased funding because they're agricultural and mechanical, old term, but very specific kind of majors that are offered, very specific majors that they want to ensure get that aid. And so that's something to also think about when you're sharing the value of HBCUs, depending on where you live across the country. A second myth, and I'm gonna kind of go through this a little quick. HBCUs are not worth the cost. So when you're thinking about the cost, you're thinking about that bottom line, but you're also thinking about the experience that you're gonna get. So a Gallup poll recent Gallup polls show that African American graduates of HBCUs are more likely to have felt supported in college, and to be thriving afterward than their Black peers who graduated from PWIs. Now, I do challenge, what does it mean to thrive? Is it just the financials? Is it how you feel? Is it your connection still to the university? But I would definitely say, if you're thinking about the price tag at the very bottom line, and you're also thinking about your experience, HBCUs are definitely worth it. And then the last one that I really want to highlight, HBCUs don't give out scholarships. So I got a scholarship, so I know if I got a scholarship, I have hope that many other students can get scholarships. I was a bright student. There were times when I could have done better, but I think Bethune-Cookman at the time was very focused on not just getting students from their state, but from kind of these outlying states to also consider their school. So they invested in me, and they gave me a scholarship. What is the Livingstone College? Actually, they came to the Boston area, and they gave 15 students at Brockton High School full tuition and fee, room and board, plus book scholarships. So HBCUs do give out scholarships. Now, Livingstone College may be a college that you're like, I've never heard of that before. And that's okay. Because schools outside of kind of our big five, there's like five that kind of dominate a lot of the conversations. They're still giving out money. So 107 minus 5, the rest of those schools do give out quite a bit of money, because they're trying to attract students, and attract students in a way that they haven't before. And I also want to name UNCF. That's another resource. UNCF has member schools, so they give out a lot of money to their member schools, but then they have a second tier, and they're giving out scholarships to Black students who may be going anywhere. So that's another resource. And then they have another pool where they're just giving out scholarships. So whatever kind of, note that their donor kind of put in there, but a lot of the money is for member schools, and then some scholarships are just for students if you identify as Black and you're going anywhere. So I'm gonna go through a few other things really quick. So just when you're thinking about, is this school credible? Do I want to recommend this school to my student? Credibility is a lot of times based on rankings. Just be aware of that. There's other things that go into, is a school credible? Credibility is based on alumni giving and reporting on job attainment 6 months in the field after graduation. So if I am a business major and I go the healthcare route, that might not be included in the rankings because I did not get a job in my field. So there's a lot of different things that go into that. So make sure you're aware of that. And credibility is based on popularity and public opinion. So, love Howard, love Spelman, but there are other great institutions out there. So don't let, the top 5 kind of steer you away of really thinking about other options for students. So this is just my underdog list. Livingstone College, I talked about them giving out those scholarships, and almost kind of creating a posse-like experience, which I think is going to be valuable in terms of retaining students. Morgan State University, they just have a beautiful campus, and they just reached the $100 million dollar endowment, which is much lower than like Harvard, which I love Harvard, but much lower than that, but it's still pretty a pretty amazing accomplishment. And Tuskegee, I just think they have very niche programs in biotechnology, aerospace. They have a veterinarian medicine program. So if you're looking for any of those programs and you're looking to have a great cultural experience as well on campus, I think Tuskegee is a great pick. I will go, I know we're at 7:45. So if you have students that are interested in HBCUs, this is what I would say. I love for folks to go the direct application, direct kind of pathway. I'm going there freshman year. That is great. They can apply via the Common App. They can also do the HBCU Common App. So you can pay $20 and apply to all these different HBCUs. If you're just not sure where you want to go, but you know you want to have that experience, you want to have options. If it doesn't come out to cost the amount that you wanted to, if cost is a factor, maybe you go associates to transfer. So you're going associates to bachelor's. So you're getting your associate's degree first, maybe it's a lot more affordable, and then you're looking at that HBCU option when you're stepping into your junior year. You can also go PBI to HBCU. So there are some predominantly Black institutions that are kind of, associate's degree granting. They have strong relationships with HBCUs and will give you a seamless transfer. For example, Roxbury Community College in Boston has a strong relationship with Fisk. So if you're worried, maybe you really want to go to Fisk, but you're not ready to quite yet, you can make sure that your credits will transfer seamlessly. And then programmatic expiration. So maybe you got into Brown. That's amazing. Go to Brown. And you can also be a part of this Tougaloo exchange program. You can get that experience, that cultural experience of being in Mississippi and doing that research project, which I'm sure is amazing. And also being at a HBCU and kind of getting some of that fun connection, kind of that social opportunity as well. You could do a domestic exchange program if your school has it. So UMass Boston, here in the Boston area, they have a domestic exchange program. So if you're a student in Boston and you can go to UMass Boston for free, and maybe, that's your best option, go to your best option. And you might be able to study at Morehouse for a year and get that experience. You can study at Howard for a year and still be a UMass Boston student. You can always go bachelor's to graduate. So you might be in a different place in your life once you get to graduate school, but you can still have fun. You can still go to the football games and have that social experience at a different type of cost in a very specific program. Or you can just go to homecoming. So if you got into a school that's close to an HBCU and you rather, the financial aid and the fit and, you feel comfortable on campus and you're happy where you're at, that's great. And you might drive, 10 miles and go to the homecoming and have that good social experience and meet some people and go back to your campus. So there's many different ways to engage. The only thing I did mention, and I am at the end of my presentation, HBCU tours. So I talked about at Westinghouse, we started the Pathways HBCU program. So we spent some time learning about HBCUs, and then we also did an HBCU tour. That's a great way for young people to experience HBCUs and actually think about if they really want to have that option or not. We offered ours for free because we got a generous donation. I have a friend out in California. Her program is called Stepping in the Right Direction, and she's been doing HBCU tours for like 15 years. And she, fundraisers for that. So there are a lot of different opportunities for young people to experience a lot of different colleges, specifically HBCUs, and get that experience even if they don't have an HBCU that's near them, that they can't, drive an hour to go see, or they don't have the means to fly in. So that's our presentation. I hope that it was helpful. I hope that it was enlightening, and I thank you all so much. And if you have any questions, let me know.
Thank you so much, Portia. I think I speak for everyone watching tonight that was both informative and fun and inspiring all at the same time. And so I'm really hoping that the counselors on the call are feeling invigorated to start some conversations with their students about HBCUs. We've got a couple of questions in the Q&A box, so I'll go ahead and read those off to you. One of the earlier questions we had was when you were introducing yourself, Portia. So is the HBCU 12-week program just for students that are part of West End, or can other Boston students participate?
Oh, good question. So typically we offer it first to our members over at the Westinghouse, but last year it was so funny. We had a parent that came to me. He says, "My daughter's in Metco. She loves it there, but just has a different experience. And I know she's thinking about going to HBCU. She's a sophomore. Is there any way she can go on the trip?" And so I was like, "Oh man." Yes. And she went. And now, she's a peer leader, she's gotten involved. So I would say if you have my information, definitely reach out to me in September. That's when we usually open up the application. This year, we're going to start in January and have a January through May experience for them. So after April vacation, they'll come back, do a presentation and a little bit of service. So there are cases where if you're not a member of Weston House, you can't engage.
Amazing. And yes, and I will use this time as a quick disclaimer that the recording of tonight's session and follow-up email with any resources or links mentioned today, as well as Portia's contact information, will be sent to all of our registrants. So we really encourage you all to build connections and create community and keep asking those questions and those kind of one-on-one bases. So definitely stay in touch. We have a couple other questions. So someone said, I think it's phenomenal that you were able to attend an HBCU on a full ride. That is awesome. It has been my experience as a counselor that many of our parents and students have had challenges with scholarships and funding. Do you have any suggestions for students seeking scholarships from HBCUs?
Yes, I would say two things. Definitely think about first the HBCU Common App, only because I feel like if students haven't heard about the school, they're probably not going to apply. And so typically at least me, I find the students are applying to kind of the big five. And those schools, they have many applicants that apply. So the pool just kind of gets smaller and smaller, even when you think about aid. So please consider the HBCU Common App. And not that they would go, but they might get accepted to a school out in Orlando or out in Florida, Georgia, somewhere. And I know it might not be the Northeast and they can hop on the train. But please think about that. And UNCF, the United Negro College Fund. So they have, again, 3 different tiers. The first one, they have a lot of scholarships for students in their, I forgot how many, but a part of their member colleges. So, if you're going to one of those schools or applying to one of those schools, you can apply to the scholarships on that particular list. And then they have a second tier where if you're just a student that identifies as Black and are going anywhere, you can get funding. And then they have another, it's a much smaller pool, but another pool for just general scholarships with no major requirements around your demographics. It might be specific then more to a specific program, so you have to kind of look at that. But yeah, those are kind of the 3 that I would say just in general. Now, if you're specific to Boston and you reach out to me, I would gladly send over our scholarship list. Those are scholarships that students have gotten in the past. I know Fidelity Scholars is a newer one. It's multi-year. And that's another thing. Think about, things that are multi-year versus one-time awards. But I would gladly send over that list. I just compile some stuff throughout the years, and it's very specific to Boston and kind of Massachusetts. But just across the landscape, I'd definitely say UNCF is a good one.
Thank you so much. We have 2 other semi-related questions. How do you discuss the lower graduation rates at some HBCUs while also talking about the benefits to students and parents and families?
Yeah, so I think it's a myriad of different things. So me as a success coach even in the Boston area, I've seen a challenge with graduation rates, especially leading, out of COVID, and the effects of that for years and years. And I would say the challenge with some HBCUs, it kind of depends on which one you're kind of talking about. If it's like putting one on the spot, if it's like a Howard versus, that's in Washington, D.C., and it has a different culture, even with the student body, than somewhere out in the woods of Mississippi. I think many students, or my wonder is that if, they got accepted to these great schools, I think in general, I would look at the financial aid and think about the front loading of that first year and if that is even sustainable. Because I think a lot of times students, they go, it's a good first year package and it's really not sustainable. So I don't know if that's, one of the issues that may be kind of bubbling up. And then the second one that's kind of tied to that is you might have to hustle those, sophomore, junior, senior years. So if you get that first year aid and it's great and you think, I don't have to apply to any scholarships, I'm okay. I just kind of come and that's what happens. Also kind of think about that. They might have to really, really push to stay there. And then another thing that I see just in general with students going out of state or just being outside of Boston, you got to weigh all the costs. So how am I going to physically get there? Do I have to fly there? I know my parents said that they're able to help me, but are they really able to help me? And what does that look like? So kind of just weighing all those different costs, because all of those lead into, I can't go back. That may not mean I don't go back to college ever. That means that I can't go back there. So that's kind of how I would, answer that question, especially if I'm not sure which school it is and I'm not sure why their graduation rates are much lower, and I'm not sure if those students went other places to complete their degree.
Yes, absolutely. And just want to underscore that thinking of completing the idea. And so I think a lot of people hear low graduation rate automatically assume poor curriculum or that students are not continuing with college because they're dropping out of college altogether. And so definitely finishing that thought and figuring out what the whys behind that might be. A lot of students don't graduate from any institution, HBCU or not, due to poor fit, and that can kind of always be backwards planned based on having conversations with students early on and finding that good fit. So this is part of that solution to really increase those graduation rates, is making sure that students are applying to really good fit schools. So definitely wanted to underscore that. I see a question of, are there any HBCUs that you know of that just charge one tuition rate regardless of if you were an in or out of state student?
Yes, all of the private ones. Because I don't know all of them, but like Bethune-Cookman University is a private institution, so they have one tuition for in-state and out-of-state, which is true, if I'm not mistaken, of all private institutions. So yeah, I would say any school in general that is a private school would have one tuition. Now, don't sometimes you have to ask, and sometimes there's all these like hidden things I'm finding that you really don't know unless you ask. So for example, I had a student that went to Lincoln University, didn't realize that Pennsylvania, the state of Pennsylvania, has some sort of agreement with the state of Massachusetts. So she was able to get her Mass grant that's specific to if you're going to school in Massachusetts when she was in school at Lincoln. I had no clue. I thought it was wrong. And I'm like, oh, they're gonna tell you later that you don't have that money. And they never did. And I was like, okay, well, I don't want to say anything. And then second year it happened again. And I was like, well, let me just find out about what this is. And then there's some states, it's kind of more so for schools that are kind of on the edge of two states. They might offer the tuition of the other state if it's lower. I know sometimes in Massachusetts or in the Northeast state, they do that. It's also an opportunity to kind of recruit more students. So yeah, those are just some other things to kind of ask about, think about as well.
Definitely being creative, asking questions, connecting with admissions officers, financial aid officers at those schools, because oftentimes they know more about their internal workings and can offer some workarounds as well that can help lower costs. And so the last question you sort of already addressed, Portia, but if you have anything to add, you can. Someone said, you mentioned that HBCUs are more affordable for students coming from the West Coast and paying out-of-state tuition at an HBCU. Would it really be cheaper than colleges in-state tuition in their own states?
Possibly. So I don't want to just tell you blanketed that it will be. But on the Northeast, for example, when I'm talking about a state school, UMass Amherst, love UMass Amherst. Great school, great, programs. When I think about their tuition and fees, room and board, you'd pay less just before transportation and all those other added costs. You pay less, if not the same, if you're attending Bethune-Cookman University, because the school is about like $30,000 a year. But you got to fly in and a lot of other costs. So you got to weigh the other costs. But yes, especially because Most of the schools are concentrated in the South, even compared with, I'm just using New England. I'm not 100% sure about West Coast schools, but I can imagine it's something similar, especially because there's some very elite schools in the West Coast as well. You're looking at a similar, if not lower cost, specifically because of the location. That's not true in every single case, right? But many times that is true just by pure cost of living, lower costs in those concentrated areas anyway.
Yeah, wonderful. And then the last thing in our Q&A box, Brenda shared that USC will send students to an HBCU for a semester. So definitely, regardless of whatever institution your students attend, check to see what those options are, because like Portia mentioned, there are other ways to be involved and to attend an HBCU in different capacities. So definitely some food for thought. And we are perfectly on time. And so with that, I really just want to thank you so much, Portia, for joining us tonight, for all of the information and the resources that, again, will be shared with folks in a follow-up email. We encourage you to stay connected in the counselor community through College Essay Guy. Feel free to start discussion posts on HBCUs, keep that conversation going. And again, keep an eye out on our webinar and live events page for future FGLI webinars that will be coming in the following months. Yeah, and thank you all so much for joining. We really hope that you take this information back to your students and families. And yeah, I hope you all have an amazing night. Thank you again, Portia, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Bye, everyone.